So at this point now, I really want to take some time just to highlight when you are officially responsible. Now that I've introduced you to the RIBA work stages 1 to 2, that's the 0, 1 and 2, they're the first 3 stages, and some of the other players that you might have to collaborate with as part of your appointment, I now want to bring your attention to the architect's appointment again. And I referred to this earlier in the slide, if you remember, how important it is. It is important to keep your architect's appointment in your thinking when you are charged with delivering a project as a qualified architect. Others might get away with it who are not qualified. Architectural designers, architectural consultants, and the like. You know what I mean. They are not qualified architects in a conventional sense that I am referring to here, and why you're spending the best part of 7 years, maybe less, maybe more, depends on all how clever we all are, but it's usually a minimum of 7 in any event, to get qualified. And that's an investment that you've put in to your profession, and that should be recognized. Now, understanding the process also means keeping yourself organized. There we go again, organized. It's so important, because it's important to keep yourself organized for your project and to keep your project under control, and knowing what your professional responsibilities are as a practicing architect. You need to have a grip on this from the very beginning. That is when you are discussing the project with your client for the very first time. Your project really begins at this point with your client. When you have your initial discussion, you're gathering your thoughts, you're trying to position yourself, what's going to happen here, what this could mean for you as the architect in practice, and indeed what you would be expected to provide. And you need to think about, is your practice set up, geared up to be able to provide that? And if not, do you have to bring in more staff? Do you have to reorganize in some way to accommodate this project? Maybe it's a project you might say, oh, it's a bit big for me, I'm not able for that. Most of us tend not to say that for obvious reasons. We say, well, we'll find a way of doing it, and we do. So just a quick reminder to orientate yourself with where you are. In the first video, I'm concentrating providing you with information relating to the business elements connected with starting a project with your client. And then I am focusing on what I believe is important for you to have in place even before you start getting down to the real work on the project. And the real work we might all suggest is the design work. Let's get down to that. That's where the fun is. Of course it is. I understand that. So I want to make sure that you have organized yourself correctly, that you are indeed in control of the process. And this means having a formal arrangement in place with the client. I can't overemphasize that. You must get that in place, some form of words. You may be watching this video because you're already engaging on a project with your client. Perhaps you are not certain at what point you should introduce the subject of your appointment and formalizing your arrangement of the project and your project activities in some way. Maybe too, you've not yet discussed your fee charges either, and neither does your client know what to expect from you. I want you to consider your situation with regard to your architect's appointment. I referred to this earlier, if you recall. So let me ask you now, have you actually got an architect's appointment in place? Do you have anything in place with your client? You must have some form of agreement in place before you undertake any work, paid or not. If you are working on a goodwill basis, hoping for your appointment will follow and payment will be made and all will be well because there's mutual trust, you are already in deep trouble. I have to tell you that, because you're not complying with the ARB rules. You could very well be disappointed with regard to realizing any expected fees, and potentially land yourself in difficulty, professionally that is, and having to explain yourself to the ARB. That is not a good place to be. You've got to avoid that. That's trouble from the beginning. You have to rectify that situation, and before you become too involved with the project, because your understanding and expectations of professional services you intend to provide may well differ from that expected by your client. and that is a risk you should avoid. Moreover, you are in breach of the ARB Code of Conduct 4.4. It states quite clearly, something that you are expected that before you undertake any professional work, you have entered into some form of a written agreement with the client, and which adequately covers the contracting parties, that's you and the client, the scope of the work, that's the nature and the complexity I referred to earlier, and the fees or method of calculating fees, whether it's on a fixed fee or a time charging, and who will be responsible for what. Now, there's a list of other requirements, you know, that you need to refer to under this section 4.4 that you really must not ignore. You need to be alert to what's going on there. And just to add some spicy sauce to this, would you please refer to my article number 1, which sets out why you are exposed professionally if you do not have some form of arrangement in writing between you and your client. And this article 1 is the very first article I wrote, actually, because I thought it was so important, but it actually provides you with a pretty potent wake-up call. If this article 1 provides you with a wake-up call, then this video will have done a great job. You'll find it on our website, and I'll place a link for that below in the description as well. The article will give you a very good overview of what the judge has to say to an architect. If you've ever been in a court situation in your professional capacity, I have on numerous occasions, not on the wrong side, I'm not saying thank heavens, but it's a wake-up call, I can tell you. But Article 1 will tell you what the judge had to say in a particular case where no written arrangement was in place between the architect and their client. The architect believed the appointment situation to be one thing, and the client, though, decided to challenge that understanding because it suited them. You know, so you can't just take everything for granted. The big takeaway, therefore, is this: that was the architect really the architect? Now, if you read that article, I think you'll find it very interesting. At the very least, you must have an exchange of letters, as I said before. They must be in place between you and your client, setting out the basic services will be and the fees that you'll be charging. And when you read my article, you will understand why this is hyper important. A simple exchange of letters will suffice for the initial stages of the project, for your RIBA stage 0 to 1. In actual fact, within your own mind, this is usually where you should begin with your project. Get something in writing early in work stage 0, so you're in a good place. So let me tell you the way I approach matters with a new client, and the very initial stages of the projects is crucial for this. Even clients I have worked with previously know what to expect from me, and I'm of course thrilled when they come back and say, you know, we've had good fun with you on the first project, let's do another one, and that's always a very satisfying position to be in. So the first thing I would say is have the initial meeting to discuss the project in general terms. This will be your initial project briefing meeting with the client. And then the next thing I would say, maybe, seek to identify aspects relating to work stage 0 and 1 with your client. You just refer to the RIBA work stages, it tells you what it is. The next thing I would say would be, these will usually relate to the general development and project matters, and then of course matters relating to the building specifically. Things such as the building's function, specific areas within the building, and perhaps how certain areas might need to relate to one another. That's spatial relationships, etc. Or indeed you might have to do some research on that on behalf of the client as well, and so as to make sure that the client is getting the best value for their money. In other words, you have getting a good grasp of the client's intention, that is the broad outline of the project objectives, forming your initial project brief. So you're beginning to sort of generate a brief at this stage, and it has sufficient detail for you to set out in a simple letter what your input as the architect would be to cover work stages 0 and 1. Essentially, you will have sufficient information to cover general briefing for the project, but which further briefing detail will need to be added to it later. That's normal. That's normal. There's nothing unusual about that. The brief will evolve, but you need something to start with, and you need that document in writing. You will also, of course, set out your fee charges, which might be on an hourly charge rate, or it might be for a fixed fee. I will be referring to this again in this video, so I will also be suggesting the best time for you to get your working arrangement finalized between you and your client. Your formal working arrangement with your client for the initial stages 0 and 1 will generally consist of the following. Let's say I'll just give you a rundown what I think. There will be develop the project brief with the client, assemble site information. You'd be developing a feasibility study. This would be is to verify sketches, maybe to verify the viability of the intended project on a number of levels, such as cost, project risks, initial site survey information, for instance, general site appraisal, early planning observations, indications, just basic facts of what you might know about that. In fact, this information, together with your initial design thoughts, are in place for you to develop a concept design for the project when you arrive at that. And this comes later, and it comes in work stage 2. So identify then your project. You'll also in stage 0 and 1 be identifying your project budget, of course. What did I not think of that? Your project budget, you know, it's all down to cost, and your client will need to have some handle on that as well. And you need a strategy for doing that. Set out a project program is always a good thing. What your expectations are, what you feel you can deliver, what your client is, and how you're going to marry into those client expectations. And then you, of course, you'll have a conversation about project procurement. And again, depending on the nature of what you're designing, how you're designing it, will dictate, you know, the project procurement strategy. And then, of course, roles and responsibilities. Remember, I referred earlier to there are other players. So these other players will have roles and responsibilities, and as you will, as a client will, and how they all overlap and interact with one another. So you need to have a sort of general overview of what to expect from that as well. And then any further information requirements would come into that mix. So armed with all of the above information, which is sufficient in detail for the client to decide whether or not to proceed to the next work stage, which is work stage 2. And then with work stage 0 and 1 activity drawing to a close will mean verifying the viability of the project to your client by way of the feasibility studies. And this will be the time for you to transition from a simple exchange of letters between you and your client to perhaps a more formal architect's appointment document. Now, that would be, let's say, during the latter part of work stage 1, when you are concluding on the feasibility. By that I mean you are verifying the project's viability with your client, and you will have done that with, you know, conversations, discussion, gathering information, and maybe some simple sketches just to give a visual impression of, you know, how things could work. So you're not doing, for your feasibility study does not mean you're doing concept development and making proving that the whole thing works. You're just verifying the viability of the project, and that, yes, oh, that's feasible. So this is the time when I begin introducing my clients to the necessity for a full architect's appointment being in place. That way, all is in place and ready to proceed with the RIBA stage 2, which is the concept development, concept design development. And both parties are clear on what is expected. So you've done all your feasibility work, you've checked the viability, and now you can get down to some serious concept development, and that's really where an architect comes into their own, there's no doubt. And until you have your client's written instruction to proceed with work stage 2, I will ask you not to venture off developing detailed design thoughts and ideas and about a project, or setting out any detailed advice in any form that is not really your project until you have some formal arrangement in place. You know, the client has no commitment to you until you have that formal arrangement in place. You will understand better why you should be careful about giving free advice, of course, when you read the article I referred to earlier. So please make sure you don't wander off and start giving shall we say, free advice, which is even worse, on a goodwill basis. It doesn't exist. Just get that out of your vocabulary. Okay, good. So what are we going to move on to next?